This is the Blackout podcast.
Hey Chris, thanks for coming to the podcast today.
Hey Israel, great to be here.
So a brief background, Chris, we met through your meetup, Halifax Creatives.
Yeah.
Thanks for setting that up. I know you do some coding. I know you're interested in like how humans work. I also know you actually worked on the oil field, so you're to me a Renaissance man. And the hair actually
I guess it's a Renaissance haircut too, right?
it's like a Leonardo da Vinci thing. Now if you say, oh, I also paint, do you paint?
Well, funny you mentioned that. I've recently, I saw this interesting podcast about how color affects us psychologically, and that kind of, I'd never really been that into painting, but that kind of got me interested in making visual artwork with color for the first time. And so, yeah, I have kind of recently started to do that in the evenings.
See, if I knew I would have asked you some of those paintings. Now I want to see. So, like, what have you been painting?
Well, I've got a picture of one in my phone here. Yeah. If you'd like to see it, I don't know if it'll show up in the podcast very well.
Yeah, I can just cut up and put it in there.
Yeah, I can definitely send some of those over. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there's that was like a.
Oh wow! So it's like a dragon. Oh, it's like what is? Okay, so it's like a dragon with a sword of some kind, right?
Yeah. So in a lot of fantasy stories, there's this idea of like a regular person finding a magic sword and the sword kind of forcing him to fight dragons, even if he's like kind of friendly with the dragons himself. The sword's like, nope, dragon.
I know. Talking of the dragon, there's it's old, but it's called. I don't know if it's called Dragon Heart. Have you seen it?
Dragon. Yeah, the Mel Gibson movie, right?
No. That's Braveheart. The Mel Gibson one where it's a Scottish guy. That's Braveheart.
Yeah.
So Dragonheart was this movie about this guy that actually it was a scam, right? So him and the dragon are friends. He'd have the dragon fly into the town and terrorize everybody, and then he'd be like the hero. He'd come and like, oh, shoot the dragon with the arrow. The dragon would just put the arrow in his wing. I'm like, falls down, and then the town will give him money. Yeah. But then I think over the course he found out that he actually had to kill the dragon, you know?
Yeah, because the dragon had it had given part of its heart to the king.
Yeah, so he had to, exactly. That's a film. Yeah, so you're right. Like he had to kill the dragon, even though that was kind of messed up. Because I remember watching that movie as a kid, and it messed me up a bit.
Before I saw that movie, there was a book I read by Carl Sagan about dragons and how dragons were like this symbol for the reptilian cortex. Yeah. And like when you have people following a strong leader in that kind of authoritarian way, that's actually, that leader's tapping into the reptilian cortex of all those people and using that fear and ritual motivation that's in the reptilian cortex.
You know, I didn't want to go into politics, but talking about that, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're pretty much defining what Trump is doing right now, because he's
I would
stoking
say so.
fear to make people fall in line. I actually just read this morning that there's a GoFundMe for the wall.
Yeah, I heard that people are raising millions of dollars to build their own wall.
So the GoFundMe was for $1 billion, but they raised $20 million. How does I can't wrap my mind around that. And it's it's actually scary that people can raise 20 million. So now, and I think we GoFundMe. Depending on how they set it up, I really don't know much details. Even if you don't get to your targets, you can get the money back.
Yeah, I don't know how it works with GoFundMe. I know Kickstarter, you'd have to raise the $1 billion.
No, with GoFundMe, whether you make the money or not, you get it. It depends on how it's set up, though. So those guys made $1 billion saying, "Oh yeah, we have to kill." It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So it's kind of odd that you bring that up, and it's literally what he's doing.
Well, it's a perennial thing. Like there's There's a podcast I really like called Rune Soup, where the guy talks about like ritual magic and how that relates to politics in a lot of ways. And like that's a perennial thing that the leader will tap into the fear of the populace, because if you're not afraid, why do you need a leader at all?
Yeah.
Like a leader is going to tell you what to do. He's going to restrict your freedoms.
Yeah.
Like if you're at the point where you want a strong leader at all, there's some fear already there.
Yeah.
How rational the fear is kind of depends, but like definitely it's in a leader's interest to have. I mean, depending on what the leader wants to accomplish, obviously, that's that can differ a lot. But usually, what makes a large group of people give power to an individual is some sort of fear motivation, I think.
It's like he started with the rapists are coming, they're coming to kill you, they are right by a door. It's anyway. I try to, I try to not touch it, but for some reason he always comes up. So I'm just gonna back away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's always such an open-ended question, you know?
I know, I like that. Because different people say different things about themselves when you ask that question.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I kind of have a canned answer that I use for job interviews, because job interview-wise, there's usually something you want to accomplish in answering any question. It's to seem suitable for a particular thing. So, like, I usually actually bring it back to having worked in Alberta, because that's kind of after high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I decided, well, try things that figure out what I like by process of elimination. And one thing a lot of people from my high school were doing were working in Alberta in the oil field in those days. And in the process of doing that, I got really interested in renewable energy. So that kind of was what got me to then go, okay, well, I was good at math and science in high school. Renewable energy is a huge challenge. It could use a lot of talents working in it. So why don't I try and study that? So that's what got me then to go back to do an engineering degree, and then that's where that part of my life was there. I'd had a childhood ambition of being an inventor. That was kind of, that's what I imagined.
Wait, isn't that what your card says?
Yes. Yeah.
I keep messing up your last name.
Henningsen,
yeah. It says Chris Henningsen Inventor. I was like, who is this guy? I remember getting your card, like I've never seen that before.
Well, it's, I mean, I finally got a patent at
Dude, that's cool. What's it for?
It's for a heat recovery ventilator that never freezes.
What?
So a heat recovery ventilator, basically it brings in cold air and expels warm air, and it exchanges the heat between the fresh air and the stale air.
Yeah.
So the thing with that is a normal heat recovery ventilator, as you're taking the heat out of the outgoing air, all the moisture in the air is going to solidify. And if you're running this thing in Nunavut, for example, there's going to be so much more moisture inside than outside that you're going to be spending most of your energy just thawing the ice that builds up on your heat exchanger. So what we were doing was trying to figure out a way, how can we reduce the effectiveness of the heat exchange so that rather than solidifying, the moisture just condenses, and then you can drain the water away.
Oh, wow.
So so that was a new kind of design, and we actually, followed my childhood ambition, followed it through the entire patenting process. So I've got one invention now. I'm hoping for lots more.
More to go. So let's circle back to Halifax Creatives, because I remember moving in here, and then I made one film that did pretty decent.
Nice.
But I was kind of outside looking in, and I was going on Meetup and checking out groups, and most of the groups on Meetups is for hiking. I'm lazy, so I don't like much. But I saw that one, I immediately joined. And what was the reason behind you creating that?
Well, it's a funny story, actually. What happened was, I was at the annual general meeting for Engineers Nova Scotia, and one of the talks there was about this sandbox that Dalhousie had set up for its students. And they were bringing together a business, a design, and an engineering student to work on a new product. And they had a space there, and they had, Arduinos and computers and just stuff that they could work on. make something in an interdisciplinary group. And all the professionals were going, well, why don't we have something like that? We're creative. We like working on things outside of our field of expertise. Why don't we do something like that? So there were several of us that decided to kind of try and set something like that up. And we were pretty ambitious at the time and had different visions. But my vision, fortunately, was the least ambitious one. I just wanted to have a networking group where people could come and talk about their projects and because, it's inspiring to hear about other people's projects. It really gets your own juices flowing.
Some of those projects go fucking weird though.
Some of my projects are pretty weird. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were saying before the show that the quantified horoscope, that's a weird project.
It kind of makes sense. Actually, explain a bit about that one.
Yeah, well, I'd been taking courses about data science, and I heard this quote that millionaires don't use horoscopes, but billionaires do, which I don't fully get what that means. But I did get to thinking, we have 50 years of stock market data.
Yeah.
If there is, if astrological cycles have an effect on the stock market, it'll be pretty easy to find. And it is pretty easy to find. You can just load them all into an Excel file, make a few pivot tables, and there's the effect. So my idea with the quantified horoscope was well, first, of course, I wanted to use it to invest. But the funny thing is, if you follow a horoscope investment style, it's just buy and hold. Which I was so kind of excited at the start to think oh, okay, so I'm going to analyze this a whole new way. It'll be an input that no one else is using. I'm going to have an edge over people. And then it's what they tell you on day one of Investment 101, buy and hold. Yeah. So in a way, it was kind of oh, I'm on the right track. I'm getting the result everyone who's successful already tells you. Yeah. I'm just validating it, or I'm getting there another way.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it was well, I'm not going to be doing anything different than what I'm already doing. But then I thought, well, hang on, people like horoscopes. Yeah. And this is kind of the first quantified people don't usually use statistics for making horoscopes. So with the quantified horoscope, that was well, I have these pivot tables now. I think we're in the year of the dog right now, for example. Okay. I know kind of what sort of effect that's had over the last 50 years. I can just make little horoscope type predictions for that. Yeah. And so that was kind of the first app I made.
Yeah, by the way, it's in the App Store.
Yeah,
I know I use that. I'm horoscopes to me, I remember reading them thinking, but it's kind of cool. It's a great way to meet people, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's instead of saying, oh, check out this app where it tells you today is your day of whatever. Mm-hmm. This one is based on data, right? Especially if the person is interested in data. So I remember I have it on all my phones except this new one. So I'm going to get it again. I just got a phone recently. So no, I check it. It's really interesting. And I know you have a new project you're working on, an app you want to develop.
Yeah, there's a couple more apps that I've made. There's a product called the Muse, which is actually also made in Toronto. And it's just a headband that records your brainwaves.
Oh, okay.
And so I made a dice rolling algorithm that's based on your brainwaves. Oh. Which sounds like a kind of weird thing. Why would you want that? Well, the reason that you would want that is there's several theories about the brain being a quantum computer. And if you have a quantum computer and you're using a quantum function to make a dice roll, you can do several experiments that people are doing in quantum physics. You can do them a lot cheaper if you have an app that has, if the brain actually is a quantum computer. Mm-hmm. And so usually they do things like electron tunneling or what's the other? Oh, whether an isotope decays, that kind of a thing. So those are fairly expensive if the brain actually is a quantum computer. And I think you could figure out whether it is from something like this, whether you can run the same quantum experiment based on brainwaves.
Okay. So how's that project going?
I've got iteration 1 out there. My problem often is that I take kind of double dips in a lot of the things that I investigate. So I've got iteration 1 out there, and I'm not sure whether it's worth making like iterations 5 to 7. You know?
Why not?
It's a good question. The making the first draft of anything is, I think, a lot easier than the polishing, at least for me.
Yeah,
I know.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Because, like, talking of drafts, when I think of draft, I think of writing. That first draft, like, I can write in a day, right? But then you read it, I'm like, no, oh no. But cutting it down from good to really, really good is a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a very different kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And especially in like programming is an interesting medium because it's, in a way, it's just writing, but it's kind of a grammatically very unforgiving writing. So
one comma will mess everything up.
Yeah, exactly. And so the editing is really kind of, it's quite important.
Yeah.
And it's not always obvious if you've made a mistake or if you're just not thinking about the problem in the right way. So it's, I think, a lot easier to solve the wrong problem than to know you've solved the right problem the wrong way, you know?
So, talking of programming, what languages do you write in?
These days I'm doing a lot in Python. Yeah, it's that's kind of, it's just so user-friendly that if you have really ambitious things you're trying to do, Python does a lot of the work for you in any field.
Okay.
So, for example, one of my programs does web scraping, and the first language that I learned was C++, and I had this idea for a long time and tried to implement it in C++ for a long time, but that just was, I didn't know how to get there. And then, so what I finally did was I actually figured, okay, well, I have the free time now, I can do this. Why don't I just hire a tutor for a couple of hours to just give me some pointers of how to approach this problem? And he said, well, you should learn Python and you should use the Beautiful Soup library. So I did those things, and now I have an iteration 1, and that's one where I actually am working on new iterations and seeing.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Great. And so what was there's another, tell me about the stock app, the stock predicting app.
Yeah, that's the one that I was just talking about.
Okay.
So it does a web scraping thing. I mean, I found it very interesting how just the stock market is this very high level data source. Like if there is there's this idea of like a mass unconscious, or like a kind of one universal mind that we're all sort of affected by, like a zeitgeist kind of. And if that's real, then the stock market would be the place where you'd see it, because there's very good data being kept on the decisions made there.
Every tiny dot.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very much, a lot of those decisions are based on emotions. So,
that's right. That's right.
Like you can, in my quantified horoscope app, for example, Mondays is the only day of the week when the stock market actually declines on average. Well, that's exactly what you'd expect. People aren't optimistic on Mondays. People are bummed out because they're going back to work. They're hungover. They're all these things, right? So the stock market has a lot of that. It's like a way of quantifying emotions. If everyone who invests, which is like a big percentage of the world, is pessimistic on a given day, you're going to see that in that more people are selling stocks. or want to sell stocks. So the thing that I'm doing with the stock testing app is to look at how that correlates with the words that show up in association with a stock. So there's this guy who has, I forget what the project is, but he's basically, his theory is that he's crowdsourcing intuition.
Oh.
So based on changes in linguistics, he's looking at if a new word in particular shows up, what does that indicate about what people are intuitively expecting? So one of the things, for example, is he can find out like earthquake. If a lot of people are suddenly saying earthquake in a given area, well, maybe there'll be an earthquake there.
Oh, wow.
And like The Economist, actually, which is like a very respected publication, has an R-word index, which is just a count of how many times the word recession shows up in publications, and they find it a much better predictor of a recession than really anything else you can use to predict a recession.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that makes sense. Like a lot of us have intuitions of what's going to happen sometime in the future. So this, what I'm doing there is kind of a similar thing of trying to look at what words are showing up with other words, and then using stock market data, not so much to predict the stock market, but to get a sense of what do these words mean.
Okay.
On an emotional level.
So how would it work?
So say, for example, I'm looking at what words show up with Microsoft. And I'm counting pages where the word Microsoft shows up. And then I'm counting how often the word good shows up on those pages. And I'm comparing that to how often the word good shows up on pages that don't contain the word Microsoft. So say that good shows up 1.5 times as often on a page about Microsoft as it does on just any page. And then Microsoft's stock goes up the next day.
Okay, that's interesting.
So then that tells me something about the word good. And like I think the first two words I used were actually good, bad, and then.
So what did you see when you typed bad? What words were closely related?
Right now, I'm mostly working on getting a big enough data set.
Oh, okay.
Because, it is kind of what you'd expect. Good is kind of a positively correlated, bad is kind of negatively correlated. But there's a lot more words where it's kind of a lot harder to tell.
Oh.
And it's there's enough noise in a system like that I think you also really want to get a very large data set.
Yeah.
So,
like, will it be easier to filter it?
Sorry?
Filter that noise?
It's hard to say. I think because I'm looking at really any word, I think it's a bit more difficult because there's a lot more factors that I'm also trying to tease out. If the word good shows up a lot, but so does unethical.
Oh, okay.
Or like, or growth, but also risk. It's I think there's a lot more different factors, and in some sense, if you're looking at what people are saying about something in the entire internet, I think that's a really it's a big data set to begin with, and you don't necessarily know what's noise. What looks like noise might just be a signal you haven't discovered yet.
Yeah.
So that's. At first, I was using a fairly medium-sized data set, and I did find some interesting correlations there, but enough to really have like a useful thing where you can take any random word and go, this is what that word means on an emotional level.
Yeah.
That I think it's a ways off still, and right now I've been focusing. Iteration 1 was just kind of a small data set, crunching the numbers. And also teaching myself machine learning, but now iteration 2 is more getting a larger data set, kind of automating the aggregation of the data set, and some of that cleaning of the data set, which is the filtering out the noise.
Yeah. So here's the thing, like the whole Renaissance thing. So you do that, but I also know that something that you're kind of looking at now is DNA editing.
Yeah.
I was watching this Marvel shows on every channel now. There's the Runaways, Agents of Shield, Luke Cage, like they're so everywhere. So like mutants are everywhere. Even though Marvel doesn't call them mutants, I don't even remember what they call them, but
Parahumans.
So they have Inhumans too. And really, what interested me as growing up was like initially was how cool the things they could do, but then the whole point about the X-Men and all these mutants is that they evolved, right? And evolving is pretty much just something changing your DNA. And I'm thinking, what if I was at a film thing and this lady was working on no. I was reading up on like how we are evolved to the state that there are parts of our body we really don't use anymore. And I'm oh wow, okay. So like in say 500 years in the future, human beings would look very different. And a friend of mine is working on his comic where he thinks of human beings like 50,000 years from now, right?
Wow,
we'll be like tall and like big head because like we're super smart and we need space for the brain, but we also have to be tall because I don't know. He tried to explain it. And you were talking about DNA editing. I was like, I have to ask you that. What do you think? I think I read about like a Chinese doctor saying he did something like that.
Yeah. So if he's telling the truth, and I mean, easier to say than to do, but I personally, I think it's fairly likely that he did actually do that, and so that would be the first genetically edited humans. So we've been doing this a long time. That you have in vitro fertilization, and you pick the zygote, I guess, that has the best mix. So you avoid those genetic diseases that one parent might have the gene for it. So you fertilize each other a bunch of times and then pick the ones where you didn't get that gene.
Okay.
But this guy would have actually like injected a virus that cut the DNA out at that point and removed a certain genetic component, which would make these kids immune to HIV and Black Plague, which is like, it's this mutation that's existed. And so those would be the first children ever born that were genetically enhanced, so to speak.
Pretty much, yeah.
Not just picked from a bunch of options, but actually changed what was there. So that's a thing now, I guess. Certainly, if he isn't telling the truth, I mean, it's definitely been done with other mammals. So it's not like we don't know whether it's possible. It's more a question of.
So where do you stand on it, though?
Yeah, it's a good question. My personal stance from an ethical standpoint is I'd rather have a bunch of crazy hackers in their garages doing it than Monsanto. So like either one is a problem, but I think Monsanto is the bigger problem.
Why?
And like not to pick on Monsanto, but you can't make ethical choices when you're
thinking of money.
When you're only thinking of money. Like a corporation is basically a machine, right? It's a machine that takes inputs and has an output, namely shareholder value. And if ethics tie into that, it's not clear how.
So do you think it would be sensible to have some government, restrictions in some way? Like you could do this also.
I mean, I also think like it would be a real problem if Canada is at the forefront of genetic engineering, but I think it would be a bigger problem if North Korea was. That's kind of where I keep coming back to. It's like, do you Like when fire was the big scary invention that no one knew how to control it, and it was this weird thing like we're not supposed to have this power, we're not supposed to have fire that belongs to the gods. In those days, I think you could make a very good moral case for just not messing with fire. But if the tribe across the valley has fire and you don't, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? Eventually, the people on this side of the valley will have fire. Whether it's good that they do or not, if you have that much more capability than everyone else, it doesn't really matter that it's more moral to not use that capability.
Yeah.
It might be moral to have that capability and not use it. That's definitely something. I think that's the interesting question about. Well, do we have the ability to edit our DNA and just choose not to? That, I think, is a good question, for sure.
So like, you see, I don't know, 50 years from now, it's science now. It's done. You have the option of going to like DNA, Inc., whatever.
Yeah.
And then you say, oh, I want to be taller. Or my kids that come next to me to be taller or something.
I think that's... I think it's a possibility, certainly. I don't think we're there yet of me being taller. Or even, I don't know if tallness seems to be epigenetic.
Oh, okay.
So that's, we're definitely taller than our great-grandparents.
Yeah.
And that seems to be also a question of how much protein is in our diets and everything like that. And I'm not sure we know or how much we know about how that works. But it definitely, I don't know whether we'll be able to just inject a retrovirus and then we'll get a growth spurt. Like, suddenly our bones are achy again because we're stretching out, that's...
So, what do you think, we kind of know what caused the recession, but do you think people saw it coming and just ignored it? Because everybody was making all this money that didn't really exist?
Saw the recession coming?
Yeah.
Or you mean the 2008 recession?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I didn't see it coming. I think there's a question of how long term into the future can you make useful predictions. So, for example, in a democracy, there's a lot of upsides to democracy, but one is that it's harder to predict past 4 years or 5 years in Canada. It's more difficult to know what the environment will look like past a certain point. And that makes it easier to adjust the environment as other things change. And it's good to be able to alter your environment. It also makes it harder to predict. So the recession, I think, the business environment had just kind of started changing a bit faster than it had been.
Yeah.
We had we had the personal computer revolution. We just had the crash 10 years earlier, the 2001, the dot-com bust.
Yeah.
And I think people were still kind of integrating that into the 20th century model of how economics worked. Because if you're investing in a car plant, there's a certain amount of ballast, right? If you have a 10-year investment cycle, once you've built a car factory, the car factory's there. It's not going to change that quickly. But if you're making an online store, that can be there or not there. It's very easy to replace something like that.
Yeah.
Much easier than replacing a factory.
Yeah, indeed.
And I think that in the 2000s, I think people were just coming to terms with that. And because of that, I think they were reducing how far out they were making predictions. And I think, I saw what was that movie that had all the stars about...
The Big something?
The Big Short.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Big Short. Great explanation of the whole thing. And also Market Call, about how the risk...
Margin Call, I think.
Margin Call.
Yeah.
Margin Call?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
With what's this guy? Matt Damon's friend.
Okay,
the last Batman.
Christian Bale.
No. The one after.
Brad. No.
Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck.
Yeah,
yes.
him.
Yeah.
He was in that movie, right?
I think
I
there were a
believe
lot. There
Yeah,
were a
a
lot of
lot-
movies made about the time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
and
but
it's,
do you know?
it's great.
Funny enough, the best of all for me. Have you seen Wizard of Lies?
Wizard of Lies. No,
Yeah,
no, that sounds
it's actually
like
it's
sounds like my kind of movie.
it's De Niro playing that guy, the Wall Street guy that had the biggest scam.
Bernie Madoff.
It is
De Niro as
amazing.
Bernie Madoff. Oh
Yes,
my God.
it's very good. It's so good. It's
Wow.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great great take on the whole thing. Yeah, the I think a lot of that was just the fact that they were focusing on the amount of time they could predict. This is actually, I wanted to tease this. I'm writing a book right now in the draft stage, so it'll be a while. But once that launches, I'd love to come back on.
Yeah,
And
it
then
would be nice to have you on, definitely.
Yeah, and then the next one after that would kind of relate to that, the how far out we can predict and the snapshots we take of...
So what do you think is a reasonable time, like tomorrow or 10 days?
Well, I think that... I think it depends on the granularity, like the resolution you want to make predictions in.
Yeah.
How large is the trend? Like I know in a billion years the sun will have exploded and the Earth won't be there anymore. Like that's
No! Oh God!
Hey, it's
Do you
not.
ever think we'll be able to increase? I mean, I know we keep increasing how long we live for.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we'll ever go, say, 200 years?
I hope so.
Oh my God! I don't think I'm afraid of dying. I just think I want to do as much as I want to do before I die.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when I'm like twice my current age, I might think like, okay, I've accomplished what I want to accomplish, or I've accomplished enough of what I want to accomplish. I'm certainly not there now. If I died tomorrow, it would kind of suck all the things that I wanted to still do.
I know.
And I don't know if I would ever... I guess your mindset changes also. I might at some point reach a point where I think, you know what, I have enough. I'm ready to pass the torch now. At this point in my life, I can't ever imagine having that mindset, though.
So many things to invent.
Yeah, really, right?
Tell me about Aikido.
Aikido,
How did that happen? Because I mean, I know you always like trying things. So was that how that started, or?
Well, I've been into martial arts since I was quite young.
Oh, okay.
And Aikido was always I was quite a Japanophile when I was younger. And Aikido is kind of this very yoga kind of personal development martial art that has come out of Japan. So it wasn't available when I was growing up, but I always kind of kept an eye out for it. And I've gone to now, currently at my 4th Aikido school, I guess. And I'd say...
Did you change so many schools?
Oh, just moving around.
Oh, okay.
And also, half of them I tried for about a month and said, you know what, I'm not learning anything here.
How do you decide you're learning something or not?
That's a good question. It's definitely... It's something you feel. Like, in the other martial arts school where I was going... I was taking Aikido and I was also taking mixed martial arts kind of at the same time. And there it was very easy to tell because in mixed martial arts we had kind of an open mat where we would just roll with each other and try new things and not practice specific moves, but just kind of see where we're at compared to everyone else. Yeah. And there I definitely did notice like, oh, I'm using Aikido principles here. I'm not resisting this person, so I'm not getting tired the way they are. And just that ability to apply the Aikido in like a setting that isn't like an Aikido class, applying it outside of the environment where it's made to succeed, that was very useful feedback. Mm-hmm. And at the place where I'm at now, downtown, that's very... that's there, I would say, I notice it by how I feel internally. Like, for example, there's a thing that I found incredible is the teacher there has a way of talking about reaching through joints. And like when I started reaching through my spine,
okay,
I actually...
Wait. So yeah, go back. What's reaching through joints?
Well, it's hard to it's hard to understand, right?
Okay.
But like if I put the coffee cup kind of just out of reach, and then I kind of stay there, but I reach for it. Okay. I'm stretching, but I'm also, it's not like I'm stretching while pulling, I'm stretching while pushing. And that, like if you do that, for example, with your spine, like I had some problems with my spine from mixed martial arts, getting into neck cranks a lot. Just reaching through that has really like helped align everything in a way that I wasn't able to do with just regular physio. Mm-hmm. So things like that, where you come out of a class and you're like, oh, I see the world a little bit differently now. That really, for me, was what is what I use.
So how often do you practice?
This class is once a week.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Oh, yeah, I was actually thinking when you're talking about the stock predicting app, is the wheat thing just a phase? Is it gonna go?
Like, the wheat stocks?
Yeah.
It's a good question. It's a large industry. I think that with most stocks, what you have when there's a new market is you have a lot of new people trying to get into it, and then you have some consolidation. Like Amazon, for example, right now is in its consolidation phase. When Amazon was competing against Pets.com, that was like the lots of new offerings. And I think right now in the wheat stocks, we're at that lots of new offerings phase. There's an Amazon of wheat stocks and there's a Pets.com of wheat stocks. And like if you look at Amazon or Pets.com, they were both selling a specialized thing online. It was a useful thing, and one just happened to win. And I think with the wheat stocks, it's the same thing. There's lots of...
So like what would be your way of approaching this, because there's like so many of those companies. How do you even decide? And it's not just the price of the stock, right? It's just there's got to be more.
Well, the big metric I look at is actually price to earnings ratio. Okay. And that's not a perfect metric. I would have gotten into Tesla a lot earlier if I hadn't really weighted that metric so highly. But there's definitely price to earnings is basically, say a stock, if you wanted to buy the company, if you wanted to buy all the stock, it might cost, say, $1 billion. Well, if the same stock, if the same company is making $100 million every year, then the price to earnings ratio is 10 to 1, right? And that's a very simple thing. Like if a company is bringing in a lot of money relative to what it would cost to buy that company, that's a pretty good buy, at least right now. And then you get more complicated things about, well, why isn't it bringing in more money?
Yeah, like the Tesla one, I don't get it. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it.
Yeah, well, Tesla was a kind of weird case, because if you look at its price to earnings, it looks like it's not profitable. Yeah. But the thing is, it brings in, it has profitable markets. It just spends more than it brings in. And that's the thing, like, what's it spending that money on? If a company is spending more than it's bringing in, is it spending that on just trying to stem the flow? Is it just spending that on non-profitable things? Or like in Tesla's case, it was building a lot of factories with that more money than it was bringing in. And that's...
and sending cars to space.
Yeah, well, that was SpaceX.
I know, but it put a Tesla in space, though.
Yeah.
Actually, talking of that, what do you think of Elon Musk?
Elon Musk. I think he's like a true hero. And what I mean when I say that is we think of heroes as people who are better than normal people. But I think actually, if you look at like the Greek heroes, they were better and worse than regular people. So like Heracles, for example, he did all these heroic things. He also murdered his own family. Yeah. That's that I think is what we should be thinking of when we think about what a hero is. It's someone who embodies the best and the worst of humanity, and both to a more extreme degree than a normal person. And I think Elon Musk is that. I think he's a lot better and a lot worse than a normal person. And I mean, I think that the way that he's changed the technological field, I think there will probably be some kind of like mythology around Elon Musk. Like if you look at like 1,000 years ago, there probably was a historical King Arthur, or at least a warlord Arthur.
That kind of did amazing things, and now we have him like an amazing story.
Yeah. And what exactly did he do? Well, we don't know the history so much. We know kind of how the myth grew up around him. And I suspect Elon Musk in 1,000 years, I suspect there may be myths about Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And what those myths are like, obviously, I can't know. But I think he has kind of, as what we're seeing right now is kind of how there's a historical character who's also got his own mythology.
Yeah.
And it's very weird to see that, how there's clearly an actual story of this person who's as real as you or I.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of a persona and a story and we interact kind of more with the story than the real person, even though he probably interacts more with regular people than most people of his level of notoriety. Right?
So do you really think we'll leave on Mars?
I hope so. I don't know what the odds are of it right now. I think it would be good if we did. I like organic life. I'd like it to be in more places. And I think if we leave the planet, then either we're going to meet other organic life or it won't be there yet and we'll bring it there. So I think that would be good. I think there's a lot of unknown unknowns about something like living on Mars. And I don't know what it would take. I don't know how difficult the radiation would be to deal with. I don't know how expensive it would be to bring the minimum amount to start a sustainable colony. It's, I think it's a noble goal.
So say, do you think 20,000 years from now, we've developed rockets that can go amazing speeds, and then we can go to Mars every 3 days or something? Do you think we have a colony there? Do you think we'll still do what we did here?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I think that it's an interesting question because there's some people who don't believe in the idea of progress. And I was there's actually a blog I follow called Ecosophia, which is it's by a conservative archdruid and environmentalist.
Wait, what? How does that even...
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting author. Very into the whole peak oil scene and just the idea of, he's a polytheist and he believes that progress is a god which most of us worship in today's society. And I would certainly, I'm an engineer. If there's a church of progress, I'm like a minor member of the clergy in that church. And I think where I kind of differ in his idea is that he would see progress as kind of what we do in getting better at what we already want to do. And when we change what we want to do, that would be that isn't progress, the way he defines it. And I would say, in 20,000 years, if we are able to fly to Mars in 3 days, we're definitely better at doing what we want to do today. I would hope we're also better at choosing what we want to do.
Wow,
that's
profound. I'm definitely going to have you back here. So, you do the creatives, you're an engineer, you're working on your patents, you're doing all these things. How do you fit all that into your life? Because you're one person, right?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I don't always take that second dive into things, which, I wish I had the time and the energy, I guess, to once I've kind of skimmed the surface of something to go back and take a deep dive into everything. I don't think I'm a Renaissance man. Maybe I'm a polymath. if I were a Renaissance man, I feel like I'd have also the energy to take a deep dive into all those things. I mean, if I had a wealthy patron or something that I didn't.
Like, don't walk, just do this.
Just do this. Yeah, then maybe, maybe. But yeah, definitely, I think a lot of it is just kind of dipping my toes in a lot of fields and then taking that second dive where something really has pull also.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to do the first draft, like you said, and then I also once I've done that first kind of iteration of a lot of things, that deciding then, okay, here's where I want to do the second iteration. Here's where I want to kind of go a bit deeper into the same field. That I think is that's been my strategy.
Okay.
Anyway, with that.
So I'm gonna end it with this one. What do you think would make our world better?
I've actually been thinking about that because I think there's kind of two separate strains which can sort of tie in. And this is like a very high level idea, but I think it's worth thinking about it in these terms. I haven't really put this into words before, so this might come out awkward, but there are people who live on 1/3 of their income. And the justification is if you live on 1/3 of your income, you can retire in 10 years. Because you won't need as much money. You'll keep living on the same amount of money after you retire. And if you're saving 2/3 and you invest it well, you can be self-sustainable at that point. Well, the thing is, if everyone did that, we would need to cut out about 2/3 of our economic activity.
So we would need. I don't know if you've seen Infinity War, but do you know? Did you see?
I may have. Is that
anyway? So Thanos, his whole thing is the world would be better if half of the people were dead.
I mean, I think most people agree with that if they got to choose which half.
But yeah, go on with your
Thanos. I guess Thanos knows which half. That's what makes him Thanos, right? But yeah, well, the thing is, if I only spent 1/3 of the money I bring in, then like the shopkeeper and the travel agent and all the people who rely on my spending to keep their jobs, 2/3 of them would have to find a new job.
Yeah.
And the way we do our economics right now, that wouldn't work. I think we would all like to live on 1/3 of our income, live a bit more simply, and be and not have to work as much as we do now, and be able to, to take that second dive into everything, right? If I had to work 1/3 as much as I do now, that would be cool. I think our incentives around economics aren't built for that, though. I think right now we still kind of are at a place where we need everyone to be spending all their money instead of 1/3 of their money, in order to keep the momentum going and to keep the system functioning properly. So I don't know what the better way there would be. I'm a big fan of universal basic income, but that would be something you'd have to try. But I think there's another. I think the fact that right now people can live on 1/3 of their income. I think that means also we could cut out 2/3 of economic activity. And I think we could arrange things so that same 1/3 corresponds to the same 1/3 of economic production that would still need to be around. Yeah. I think we could downshift in a pretty big way if we aligned the algorithms in the right way. And I don't know how to do that, but I think that would make the world better if we found a way to align that.
And this is the economics thing you talked about, right?
Yeah. I was saying, I think it's a question of economics, and I think private investors could move towards that if we figured out how.
Okay, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it, and I'm definitely gonna have you back.
I look forward to it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much.
This is the Blackout Podcast. Thanks for listening.